The purpose of this video is to familiarize potential applicants to the Strategic Growth Council Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, or AHSC, with the process of estimating project benefits using the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. We'll cover the resources used to estimate greenhouse gas emission reductions and co-benefits of AHSC projects, walk through an example, and address frequently asked questions. This video does not address all required elements of a complete AHSC application and does not provide project-specific guidance on quantification. Refer to the AHSC program guidelines and application materials for full requirements. Resources for estimating the benefits of AHSC projects are available at www.arb.ca.gov/cci-resources. The Transportation and Sustainable Communities section contains links to the AHSC Quantification Methodology and Benefits Calculator tool. The AHSC Quantification Methodology documents the data and equations used to estimate greenhouse gas emission reductions from AHSC projects. The quantification methodology is a resource for applicants who have questions about the data, equations, and assumptions underlying the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. CARB staff regularly review the AHSC quantification methodology and update it to improve the analysis and align with changes to the AHSC program guidelines. A list of updates for round 5 of the AHSC program is available on pages 4 to 5. The AHSC Benefits Calculator tool is an Excel-based tool based on the quantification methodology. Applicants use this tool to estimate the greenhouse gas emission reductions and co-benefits of their projects. The resulting greenhouse gas emission reduction estimates are used in project selection. The AHSC Benefits Calculator tool is organized by project component, with tabs for affordable housing, active transportation, transit, and solar photovoltaic components. The README tab contains information about the tool development and provides links to further resources. The Project Info tab collects basic information about the project. The GHG Summary and Co-Benefit Summary tabs estimate project benefits. The Documentation tab provides guidance on documentation required for the estimates to be reviewed and replicated. Throughout the tool, cells are color-coded in green, gray, black, and yellow. Green cells indicate required user inputs. Gray cells indicate automatically calculated values. Black indicates inapplicable inputs. Some inputs are conditionally required, so a cell may change from black to green, depending on the value of another cell. Yellow indicates tips for users. The Benefits Calculator tool includes a link to the user guide. The user guide provides step-by-step instructions on how to estimate the greenhouse gas emission reductions and co-benefits of an AHSC project. The steps and quantification methods are organized by project component. All applicants will complete steps 1 through 3 and steps 7 through 8, which deal with basic project information, affordable housing components, results, and documentation. Steps 4 through 6 deal with active transportation, transit, and solar PV components, and are only applicable to projects that contain those components. To determine which steps are applicable to a project, refer to Table 2. SGC defined 5 categories of eligible costs for the AHSC program. Within those categories, CARB identified project components for which there are methods to quantify greenhouse gas emission reductions and co-benefits. Table 2 lists those eligible costs and project components and describes which tab of the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool to use depending on a project's components. Table 2 also shows that for projects including solar PV components, one third-party tool is necessary, the PV Watts calculator. We'll look at each quantification method in more detail as we continue. For each project component, the user guide contains a table showing the information necessary for quantification. For example, Table 3 shows the inputs needed to estimate the benefits of an affordable housing development component. The user guide illustrates the quantification process through an example project in Section C. We'll walk through that example now. This example is for demonstration purposes only. The hypothetical project has not undergone verification of any AHSC requirements, and this video will not provide examples of the documentation necessary for an actual AHSC application. You can follow along with this demonstration using the hypothetical project information on pages 19 and 20 of the user guide. The example project is a transit-oriented development project area type located in Sacramento County. The project has 6 components: a mixed-use development combining affordable housing and a medical clinic, transit passes for residents, a new bikeway, a new walkway, expanded local bus service, and a solar PV system. The applicant requested $20 million from AHSC Round 5 and previously received $1 million from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund through the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. Using this hypothetical information, we'll demonstrate how to complete the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool for this project. The first step for all projects is to enter basic information on the Project Info tab. The project identification number is automatically assigned by the Financial Assistance Application Submittal tool when an application is created. As we noted before, the project requested $20 million from Round 5 of the AHSC program. Other GGRF funding includes money that the applicant received, requested, or plans to request from another California Climate Investments program. If that GGRF money is for a quantifiable project component that's also included in the current AHSC application, it must be entered here to avoid double counting. GGRF money used for a project component that's not quantified as part of the current AHSC application should not be entered. In this case, the $1 million in GGRF funding already received from the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program is supporting the same local bus route expansion that's part of this project example. Now that the Project Info tab is complete, return to Table 2 in the User Guide to check which quantification methods are necessary depending on the project components. This project includes a mixed-use development, solar PV system, new bicycle facility and walkway, expanded transit, and residential transit subsidies. So Table 2 shows that we need to complete all of the tabs of the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. We also need to use the PV Watts calculator for the solar PV component. Starting with the Affordable Housing Inputs tab, describe the mixed-use development and transit subsidy components of the project. The development will first be open to residents in 2021, and the dwelling type is a 6-story apartment building. Ownership projects select condos or townhouses. For senior housing, select age-restricted. Projects that include more than one type of dwelling, such as a family apartment building and a senior housing building, must complete the Affordable Housing Inputs tab separately for each dwelling type. The numbers of total dwelling units and affordable dwelling units here should match the numbers of total unrestricted units entered in the AHSC application workbook. Affordable is defined per the AHSC program guidelines. Density must also match the inputs in the AHSC application workbook. For quantification purposes, a mixed-use development combines affordable housing with publicly accessible space for commercial or social service uses. Leasing offices or common space available only to residents should not be considered mixed use. In this example, the project contains a medical clinic on the ground floor as well as affordable housing, so it is a mixed-use development. Mixed-use development projects require information about the square footage of residential and commercial or social service uses. Next, measure the distance from the affordable housing development to the nearest central business district. CARB created a mapping tool to measure the distance from a central business district to an AHSC project. The user guide contains a link to this tool on page 7. Enter the address of the affordable housing development in the search bar. In this case, the address is hypothetical. Zoom in on the address and right-click at the project location. Select Directions from here to drop a pin. Then identify the nearest central business district, highlighted in blue. Right-click inside the central business district and select Directions to here, then select Get Directions. The distance between the project address and the nearest central business district will appear on the right. If necessary, drag the blue line to measure the most direct route from the project address to the central business district. Before leaving the mapping page, take a screenshot showing the start and end pins and the distance to central business district. Submit the screenshots as part of the supporting documentation for the project. Next, enter the distance to the central business district measured using the CARB map. Now determine whether the project includes one or more traffic calming measured within 1/2 mile of the affordable housing development. Eligible traffic calming measures are listed in the Benefits Calculator tool and the user guide. This example project includes roundabouts within 1/2 mile of the affordable housing development. Notice that even though the affordable housing development section is now complete, the summary of vehicle miles traveled and emission reductions remains blank. That's because information about parking and residential transit subsidies are missing. Throughout the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool, blanks in the results summaries indicate that inputs are missing. Moving on to the parking information, start with the number of on-site parking spaces for residents of the affordable housing development. Mixed-use projects should only include residential parking spaces, not spaces reserved for customers. If on-site parking is priced separately from rent, enter the price here. If parking is included in rent, enter 0. Finally, if the price of parking on the streets within 1/2 mile of the affordable housing development increased, enter the percentage increase here. Otherwise, enter 0. The last component of the Affordable Housing Inputs tab is Transit Subsidies for residents. Enter the total number of dwelling units that will receive at least one transit subsidy. The annual value of the subsidized transit pass should be the value to the resident, not the price for which the developer purchased the pass. In other words, if the developer received a bulk discount on transit passes for residents, the value entered should be the full value of the pass rather than the discounted price paid by the developer. Lastly, enter the number of years for which the applicant will provide transit passes. Once the inputs are complete, the VMT and emissions reduction summary populates with the estimated benefits of the affordable housing development and transit subsidies. These estimates are based on assessing the VMT mitigation measures from the land use, parking, and transit subsidies all together. Each of the measures and categories has a maximum percentage VMT reduction associated with it to account for interactions between mitigation strategies and differences in travel behavior across project area types. The maximum percentage VMT reductions per category are based on project area type, as shown on Table 4 of the AHSC Quantification Methodology. Once a project has exceeded these caps, altering an input on the Affordable Housing Inputs tab will not cause the project to gain further VMT reductions. This does not mean that those inputs are not taken into account. All information on the Affordable Housing Inputs tab factors into the estimated greenhouse gas emission reductions and co-benefits. Moving on to the active transportation components of the project, the first step is to map the new bikeway and walkway. Page 24 of the user guide illustrates how each active transportation facility must be mapped with separate 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile buffers around it. The number of key destinations within those buffers must be evaluated separately for each facility. The user guide and the benefits calculator tool contain lists of eligible key destinations. A map showing the new bicycle and pedestrian facilities, buffers, and key destinations must be submitted as supporting documentation. Next, describe the active transportation components on the Active Transportation Inputs tab. Select the type of new pedestrian or bicycle facility or program. Improvements to existing infrastructure are not eligible for quantification since the baseline assumption is 0 existing bicycle or pedestrian trips. Each component should have a unique identifier, which can be the street name or another name. Facility length should be measured in one direction only, since average daily traffic accounts for two-way trips. Crosswalks should be excluded from the length of sidewalks because crosswalks are accounted for as traffic calming measures on the preceding tab. If average daily traffic is not available for the street on which a new facility is located, use data from a parallel street nearby with similar characteristics. Returning to the map of buffers and key destinations, count the number of key destinations within 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile buffer of each facility separately. In this example, there are 4 key destinations within 1/4 mile of the bikeway and 8 within 1/2 mile. There are 3 key destinations within 1/4 mile of the sidewalk and 5 within 1/2 mile. Once the bikeway and walkway are fully described, the results summary will populate with estimated greenhouse gas emission reductions and co-benefits. Next, use the Transit Inputs tab to estimate the benefits of the expanded bus service. Based on the type of service or infrastructure selected, the necessary cells will turn green. Again, give each component a unique identifier. Use that identifier in the file names of all supporting documentation. Final year operational is the last year for which there are enforceable committed funds to operate the new or expanded transit service, or the last year of the maximum useful life listed for each equipment type, whichever is sooner. Details on the useful life guidance, which is based on the Federal Transit Administration guidelines, are available in the AHSC Quantification Methodology. The example project has 5 years of funding secured to operate the expanded bus service, so the final year of operation is 2025. The estimated daily increase in ridership should be attributable only to the expanded service. It should not include baseline ridership. Transit agency partners should submit documentation showing how ridership was estimated. For both the adjustment factor and the average trip length, applicants can use a default value as shown in the Benefits Calculator tool, or provide a project-specific value. Applicants providing user-defined inputs should submit documentation showing how those inputs were derived. Then describe the vehicle that will operate the new or expanded service. These inputs are not applicable for capital improvements. Remember to complete the questions about tolls, parking, and average transit fares so that travel saving costs from the project can be estimated. Once again, the VMT and emissions reduction summary populates with co-benefits and GHG emission reductions. The final project component is the solar PV system. The AHSC Benefits Calculator tool uses inputs from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's PV Watts calculator. The Project Info tab of the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool contains a link to PV Watts. Start with the project zip code and accept the location and data on the following page. Do not select any of the legacy data options. Next, describe the solar PV system. The DC system size is calculated as the number of solar panels times the power output per panel at standard testing conditions. For low-rise residential building, Title 24 requires solar PV systems with output at least as great as the expected building electricity consumption. Applicants proposing low-rise residential buildings should exclude the size of any solar PV system required by code. Select the module and array types, then open the loss calculator to adjust light-induced degradation to 0.5%. Keep the standard values for tilt and azimuth. Do not change the advanced parameters. Continue to the results page. Save the results to submit as supporting documentation, and note the annual electricity production estimate at the top of the page. Note the annual electricity production estimate at the top of the page. Enter the annual electricity production estimate from PV Watts, then select the primary use of the electricity generated. This input determines energy and fuel cost savings from the project. With that, the information for the components of the example project is complete. Continue to the GHG summary and co-benefit summary tabs to view the results. The GHG summary tab shows the total greenhouse gas emission reductions from the project, as well as the share of greenhouse gas emission reductions which are attributable to AHSC GGRF funding. For projects without other GGRF funding, these numbers will be the same. The summary includes the same comparison for greenhouse gas emission reductions per dollar. The Co-Benefits Summary tab lists the total estimated co-benefits of the project, as well as the share of co-benefits attributable to AHSC funding. Any blanks on the Summary tabs indicate missing information elsewhere in the Benefits Calculator tool. If you notice blanks or errors, ensure that all the information from steps 1 through 6 has been entered correctly. Ensure that both the GHG Summary tab and Co-Benefits Summary tab are complete before submitting the Benefits Calculator tool. The final step is to use the Documentation tab to check that all supporting documentation needed to review the project and replicate the calculations is provided. The documentation checklists are organized by project component. These checklists are a guide only. Refer to the AHSC application workbook and other application materials for full details on required documentation, including how to name files for upload. If you have further questions after consulting the user guide and quantification methodology, check the resources page for frequently asked questions. You can also send questions to ggrfprogram@arb.ca.gov.